Welcome to Free to Speak, the New Zealand Free Speech Union podcast. If you enjoy the show, subscribe for uncensored conversations and free speech news from New Zealand and beyond.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Free to Speak, the New Zealand Free Speech Union podcast. And with me today, we have ACT MP Todd Stephenson, who's graciously agreed to join us to talk about the Nursing Council's Code of Practice and also a case we're currently taking up with Kath Simpson. Welcome, Todd.
Good morning, Jelaine, and thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and I think it's great timing as well, because the Nursing Council has released a proposed code of conduct where they are asking for submissions. Submissions close on the 9th of March, so we've got another 3 weeks to do it, but we're really concerned about some aspects of this code of conduct and how it seems to drift away from professional competency and patient safety and move more and more into the private lives, or obviously for us, the private expression of nurses. You released a media release on this last week. Please give us a rundown on this and your take on the nurses code.
Yeah, I mean, I share your concerns. I've looked at a lot of these healthcare professional bodies. I've actually been critical of the Nurses Council before they released their competency framework the year before last. But this code of conduct. Look, and I want to again acknowledge they have asked for consultation. It is quite a large document, so there is actually some really good stuff in it. But I think I felt that I needed to call out where, again, I had some concerns, and one of them is the issue that you raised around kind of free speech, freedom of expression, and what is the right balance there for a healthcare professional regulatory body to be kind of holding, what's the standard it could hold its members to, what's the appropriate balance? Because as you've, the Free Speech Union have called out a number of times, there's been some kind of cases where professionals are being held, complaints are being made against their code of conduct, which you and I would kind of describe, well, actually that's a free speech issue. They were quite entitled to make those comments in their private capacity. So I just really wanted the Nurses Council to have another look at that particular section. This is in Principle 4 of the draft code, and actually see if they'd got it right there.
Did you receive any response to your media release or sort of to the letter that you sent to the Nursing Council?
No, not yet. But I mean, again, I wrote to them first before I did actually put out a media release and just outline my concerns. Their consultation is still open, so perhaps in the fullness of time I'll get a response. But again, I just also wanted to highlight this publicly. Again, also just so that people, nurses in the profession also make sure that they have their say. And again, I've been, contacted by a number of nurses, both working for Health New Zealand and other organisations, who said, thanks for calling this out. And hopefully that will engage more people who are directly affected in this issue.
And that also has been brought to our attention as well by a number of people, sort of saying that nurses generally is a lot. They keep their head down, they do a great job, they're hardworking, they're usually swamped, and other nurses who understand what this code might do actually don't think that they realise the implications that this will have on their everyday life, on the ability to have a private expression. It's quite chilling when it seems to reach directly into private lives, 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day, and some of that private expression. Now, you and I are in agreement, I think, as well, that competency codes, there's nothing wrong with code of conduct, especially in areas like healthcare. They're very important, but I think they need to be tied to patient safety and the competency when you're off the clock. You're not talking as a nurse, and it's lawful expression. Are you familiar with Catherine Simpson's case, or sort of read a little bit about the nurse currently?
Yes, obviously I've read, what you've put out around that case, and look, that does concern me. We also had the case with the Teachers Council last year, and another example of where, a complaint was taken about someone, as exactly what you're saying, expressing their opinion online, social media about an issue that is important to them. There's a couple of points I would want to pick up on what you've said. Nurses as a profession, and we know this at the moment, right? We've got our healthcare system, particularly our public healthcare system, is extremely busy, under pressure. Nurses are just getting on with their jobs, right? And so some of them may not have focused on this code of conduct and its consultation. And again, I'm going to be honest, I don't know what process the Nurses Council went through to develop this code, but I would again be encouraging them that they actually do a proper consultation where they actually get out to the members and facilitate their involvement, right? In a way that suits them, right? Because again, people are busy, you've actually got to go. So I think that would be a really valuable exercise for them. And the second point I would make, even if you look at the way it's drafted, and, we're talking obviously about Principle 4.1 and 4.2, it's very clear they're talking about kind of social media and online communication. And again, the cases the case you cited, for example, and as I said, the other one at the Teachers Council, that's when people are in their kind of private time. They might have a particular personal view on an issue and they're just wanting to express that. But the other thing, Jelaine, is if you look at the guidance on this section, and look, again, they've tried to provide guidance to their members so that make it a bit real. It's very, very, I would say, brief compared to other parts of the draft code of conduct. And I would have thought actually they could have gone out and sought maybe some advice from even organisations like the Free Speech Union and said, okay, how can we get this right? Because, and again, hopefully you'd agree with me, it's not, there's nothing wrong in trying to provide some guidance and say, okay, well, in your professional life, you actually do need to, and again, protect people's confidential private medical information, super important. As a nurse, you actually do need to put your patient first, understand their needs, etc. And also maybe there's something around where you actually shouldn't be expressing a personal held view to a patient in front of you, right? And making a judgment on that. That might be all entirely appropriate. It's as you say, it's when they step away from their work and they're maybe wanting to call out, maybe it's an unpopular opinion about staff shortages in New Zealand in the healthcare sector or something like that. That's them in their private sphere. So I think they could have done a bit better in, as I said, tightening up what the actual code of conduct says around, personal opinions, freedom of speech, but also maybe some of the guidance.
I think that you raised such a great point there, just because first would be so open to consultation in terms of stress testing people's proposed conducts. Does this breach freedom of expression in a private capacity? What do we think about that? So absolutely would be open to that, and obviously we're going to submit on that as well. But I think it's the examples, it's where the rubber hits the road, and you really do need to provide clear examples of what's in and what's out that you're referring to. It's these sort of woolly, subjective and vague terms that absolutely can be weaponized, and we have sort of seen that weaponized against nurses, against teachers, when someone decides that they're offended, or that this is ill-informed in your private life, yet they're lawful, often political statements on controversial issues.
That's right, and you're right, and I called out the vagueness of their words, not making offensive, abusive, inflammatory, or ill-informed statements. Now, again, wanting to get into a big debate, there are some areas of medicine that are contested, right? And so that if a nurse had a different view or wanted to call out, again, not, I don't think it'll be appropriate to be making these views to the patient in front of them when they're actually dealing with someone and they're in a professional environment and they've been asked to do something in that work environment in relation to a patient. But, if they're at home, they might be commenting on a post on a forum or something around a particular medical issue. That's an entirely different context. And again, we actually want to have a debate of ideas. Again, I think so long as it's done in a respectful way, that's entirely appropriate.
We were also concerned about, I suppose, what we would term the lack of whistleblowing pathways, or, as you say, the ability to error correct, which is really important in any industry, and especially healthcare. There is no absolute ultimate truth in terms of, we keep finding better medicine, better science, in order to, we've moved on from leeches to,
yes, that's right,
different different types of care, and if someone didn't speak up about it, and as you say, in the right forum, or at least expressing, we want the ability for nurses to be able to talk about their staff shortages, to question practices that they think are wrong, and to have that sort of pathway forward. Now, sort of a couple of other things on this. The Free Speech Union sometimes is called sort of, criticised for being a little bit of fear-mongering, like this will never happen, this is just setting a standard, and, the standard is high. But what we're actually seeing here is that the cases that we're seeing, both with Kath Simpson, I know there was an earlier case with Amanda Turner that, sort of made its way through the courts, that these aren't patient complaints. These aren't related to their professional competency. These are actually sort of complaints that have been laid completely outside of their professional capacity and sort of followed through. So it does feel a little bit like an ideological witch hunt that's happened outside of work. And then to my first point, we're actually sort of seeing this play out a little bit in England. We often see a lot of the things play out overseas first, with the Darlington nurses, even with sort of Sandy Peggy, where they had very vague codes of conduct as well about not expressing your personal beliefs or sort of kindness and inclusion, and that were weaponized against these nurses for holding their own lawful political views. So I don't think it is unfounded to be concerned about this, and I think you'd likely share my opinion on that, that this is a real concern.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that, these things should be called out. Look, and again, Minister Brown last year actually ordered a review of all of the healthcare professional, regulatory bodies. And again, that because, we're not obviously just seeing this with nurses, we're seeing this with other groups as well. And again, I called out maybe some of the cultural competencies they were embedding in their codes of practice and codes of conduct. So he has actually said, look, we need to look at this more broadly, and that's just in the healthcare space. So I'm hoping, we'll see some outcomes from that. And look, I think, again, what we want healthcare professionals to be focused on is patient safety, their competence in dealing with patients, and providing a safe healthcare experience, right? What we don't want is these bodies policing the thoughts of individual healthcare professionals and how they might act in their private life. It's basically the same thing as, forcing them to be of a particular religious belief or something else, right? That doesn't affect their work. That's their private business, or sexuality or whatever, that's their private business, and their views on particular topics is the same. So I think it's important to call this out. I think the other thing that, as a government, and again, I don't have responsibility in any way for these, healthcare professional regulatory bodies, but I do know, again, Minister Seymour, for example, with the Pharmacy Council, has made sure that actually has actually some pharmacists, practicing pharmacists on the council, so you're actually getting a balanced view about what are the issues that are important if you're actually a practicing healthcare professional. And again, I think just making sure that these bodies actually have the practitioners who are actually having to deal with the frontline issues, because this kind of principle may not be as important as some people at the Nurses Council think, right? If you're an everyday nurse practitioner, the ones around, patient confidentiality, how you treat your patients, making sure you listen to them, maybe they're more important.
I think the appointments on boards are incredibly important, as you've pointed out, also just because we don't seem to have that diversity of viewpoint and as you actually say, actual practice on the ground of what's important, what this should be tied to, and instead of searching through, as they did in Kath Simpson's, literally bulking up their complaint, searching through her private social media posts to really, give it to her, and actually focus on the patient safety. Now, on your point about government, what can we expect? You might have been familiar with the Alberta have passed a sort of a broad regulatory approach law, which has its pluses but also its minuses. But in terms of, trying to tie the regulatory codes to the area of competence and professional competency and, keep them out of other areas. Is that something that your party, that you, that you mentioned Simeon Brown's review, etc., is that something that we can expect, or something that you would be willing to support, sort of as an MP or as part of your party campaign manifesto?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an active discussion within ACT. I think it's just how do you do this in the right way that doesn't again, we don't want to create a whole nother kind of regulatory burden or regulatory bureaucracy, but I think it can be done in a way that actually says to all kind of professional regulatory bodies. And again, they've been given a special right by the government, right? I mean, they've been given the right to, in this case, register and you call it licensed doctors, or they may have been given the right to license real estate agents, or they may have been given, the right to license legal professionals. So, with that right comes some responsibilities, and I think we would say that those responsibilities are to uphold what we would call kind of universal human rights around freedom of expression, free speech, etc. And there'd be others. So again, I think we're very open to that conversation because we do think this is important. So again, we're very happy to look at the ways we can achieve this, not have to go through each healthcare professional body or each regulatory body and do it, because I think that would be very burdensome, but basically just elevate this idea around, free speech, freedom of expression protections.
There was a question about the Regulatory Standards Act and maybe the Regulatory Standards Board as well. Given, as you say, that, they exist and their purpose, their remit is derived from primary legislation, is this something that the Regulatory Standards Board might look into in terms of the codes of conduct?
Or potentially in time. Look, I think obviously the regulatory, the Department of Regulation and, as it implements the regulatory standards bill, will be primarily focused on new legislation for a start. But again, it does have the ability to start to review acts and regulations as they're updated and changed. And so again, this is an area possibly it could get into over time. It is obviously, So again, let's not rule that out. Look, I think as a first step, it wouldn't hurt to update the healthcare professionals overarching legislation anyway. That might be a good first place to start. But as I said, we're very open to looking how this can be kind of dealt with holistically.
Okay. Well, the Free Speech Union is looking to actively, sort of produce some policy papers and some drafting for that, and, would be happy to look into that further for all of the parties out there, et cetera, to improve this. Just because what we are seeing, and we'll see how Kath Simpson's case plays out. We've got the next hearing with the disciplinary tribunal in March. But given the Turner decision, which sort of says, look, you're lawfully allowed to say things and have broad private expression, but it's how you say them, which was sort of such a subjective standard on, well, I can say it, but you don't like how I'm saying it, doesn't really sort of seem to live up to the spirit of freedom of expression in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. So we're concerned about where that might lead and how many other people are. And as we know, there's not everyone like Kath Simpson who will go through this process. Most people will just shut up.
Mm-hmm.
They'll retire from private expression. They'll, they won't comment on anything, which means that they can't participate. It's an election year. What do we want of people?
Well, what we want of people is actually to understand why kind of free speech, freedom of expression is so important to a liberal democracy like New Zealand's. Continue to engage in that. It's an active debate and discussion. Like a lot of the kind of human rights we have, they are a balancing act, right? Someone's right to freely express them. Yeah, it may upset people. It may impinge on others' views as well, right? So I think it's just making sure we openly debate these, but understand why they are so important. Things that were unpopular ideas, a few decades ago are now mainstream today, right? I mean, I'm going to be participating in some events around Pride, for example, right? I mean, you know, the way that kind of homosexual law reform, for example, got got ahead of steam was people were able to discuss it and debate it. And again, back in the day, that was kind of a fringe view, right? So today it's, we expect that, every citizen, including those that are gay, are given the same rights as every other one, right? So again, I think it's just, I think that's why it's important to have these discussions. And make sure people kind of understand that we are actually trying to protect our democracy by doing this, having these kinds of conversations.
And I think that's such a good point and such a great example, because it's about having a pluralistic society, right, that moves on and that engages with each other and that changes its views on matters. The marriage, homosexual law reform, it wasn't that long ago, I still remember, but that's probably more about my age, and look to see where we are in society now, really moving forward together. But we do need to give people the space to continue to question and continue to, use freedom of speech to produce a society where people can hold different beliefs, different religious beliefs, different beliefs about specific things, and yet still be able to function and live together and not have their livelihoods threatened, which is definitely what we feel like we're seeing here. Todd, thank you very much for making the time, for coming on Free to Speak, and we hope to have you on again.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you. Great conversation.
Thank you for listening to Free to Speak. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider sharing the podcast with others. We release new episodes regularly, and subscribing is the easiest way to stay up to date. If you have any questions, feedback or suggestions, you can contact us at podcast@fsu.nz. If you want to find out more about the New Zealand Free Speech Union, visit fsu.nz.